Welcome to the second installment of Learning Hooks. Hopefully you've been able to try at least one of the previous strategies to activate prior knowledge and to build academic vocabulary. This month's Learning Hook is on the AVID strategies of marking and charting text. Today we'll talk about three different things. First, why are we talking about marking and charting text in the math classroom? We'll talk about those basics of marking text and what would charting look like for us in the math classroom. Well, typically, as math teachers, we would see this as a strategy for the ELA class. However, with Common Core and its emphasis on literacy across the content areas, math students will be required to do more reading than ever before. In fact, in Math Practices 1 and 3, they explicitly identify critical thinking skills where students will need to be able to use close reading strategies to help figure out some of those problems. I'll give you a second to read over Math Practice 1 and 3, the areas that I've highlighted. As you can see in Math Practice 1, students have to be able to understand problems. They have to be able to see the relationship between verbal descriptions, tables, graphs, and explain those. In order to be able to figure out what those problems mean, they have to be able to read a passage and pick out the important information and determine the steps that they're going to take. And in Mathematical Practice 3, they do have to read arguments of others, whether it's a classmate, an expert in a field, and they have to decide they have to make arguments, decide whether they make sense, and ask questions. And again, they have to be able to use those close reading strategies to be effective in these practices. With Common Core comes a next generation of assessments, and those raise the expectations of our students. So for example, this is an 8th grade released MAP assessment item. So our expectations for our students are going from this to this in our next generation assessments. As you can see, the level of problem solving, the level of thinking that students must do is completely different. And for our high school teachers, this first problem is a released item from the Geometry EOC. And the second problem is a sample item from our next generation of assessments. So you can see the level of thinking that they will have to do from our current EOCs to the next generation of assessments. Most, if not all of us, were not taught how to teach reading, but we are now all teachers of reading. So since we were not all taught how to do this, especially some of our high school teachers, those of you who are secondary certified, we were not taught how to do this. So we are all in this together. And so my job is to provide you with the resources and then to continue to support you as much as possible. So like I said, even though we're math teachers, we are now all also teachers of reading. When we hear marking and charting text, many of us will immediately think of an ELA class and reading a passage and looking for the author's intent. In math, we have to adjust what our idea of text actually means. For us, we have many different types of text, just like they do in ELA. Ours are just more mathematical. So for example, our texts include the expressions, equations, functions, a graph, a chart, word problems or performance tasks, and diagrams. These are our texts, and we have to support our students in how to read these and do close reading with these different types of texts. Students are expected to know the relationship between all of these values, and they have to use this knowledge to go from a chart to a diagram, or to a word problem to a graph, or to an expression, and to apply these in real-world situations. So we need to teach our students the skills to make sense of this information, because we want them to go from this to this. So let's start with our marking the text. When we look at marking the text, again, this is an AVID strategy, and I have attached this document in D2L so you can print it off and use it as you are teaching your students and modeling for your students the steps of marking text. So the first step in marking the text is to number the paragraphs. If it's only a one paragraph problem, just mark each sentence. What this does is it helps students in identifying information when they're talking in the classroom. So when they're talking in the classroom, they can say, well, in paragraph 2 of this problem, I see that we need to use such and such information to solve the problem. And it helps them speak intelligently about the problem, and it refers other students who are listening to that same area so they can follow along. The second step is to circle key terms. Look at those key terms. Are they adding, subtracting? What are important information that they'll need to solve the problem? Step 3 is to underline a verbal model. That verbal model is the expression or equation that you're going to use to help solve that problem, that real life situation. It may give you an information on a relationship between numbers, etc. The fourth step is to box the question. And a lot of times with our next generation assessments, it's not written as a question, it's written as a statement. So we have to help our students in identifying what those statements are. And I went ahead and added a fifth step for this AVID strategy, is to cross out the extraneous information. We know so many times our students get confused and try to use too much of the information in the problem when they don't need to. So let's teach them to cross out any information that is not needed to solve the problem. Let's do an example. And I've chosen, again, an 8th grade problem for this just because it's kind of in the middle between 6th and high school to kind of use. So I'll give you a second to read over the problem. Think about our first step is going to be numbering the paragraphs and then circling key terms and then underlining the verbal model. So let's kind of, as you're reading through, kind of think about what would you circle, what would you underline? Okay, so let's look at our first step. Our first step is very easy. Let's number our paragraphs. So we have 3 paragraphs, 1, 2, 3, right there on the left. The next step is to circle key terms. So, or important words or numbers and such. So as I'm reading through this, I think that a light year is a key term. I need to know what a light year is. And in the second sentence, they tell me that the light year is the distance that light travels in 1 year. As I look through this, I also notice that when I'm looking at my chart, that top label is very important. I need to know that those numbers below mean that it's the distance from Earth in light years. And then I want to underline the verbal model. Where do you think the verbal model might be? That verbal model is that light travels at a speed of 3 times 10 to the 8th power meters per second. Okay. And then I want to box the question, but again, if you notice, it is not a question, it is a statement, it is direction. So we have to teach our students how to do that. And then lastly, I want to cross out any extraneous information. So while the distance from the North Star to Earth is about 434 light years, is very helpful in helping us make sense of what the information means, we do not need it to solve this problem. And we know when students see numbers, they think they need to use them. So let's make sure that we show them that, well, yes, there are numbers, but we do not need to use them. Now, after this, the other part of marking the text has to do with helping our students make sense of the information. So even if they just do little summaries on the side. So for example, A light year equals how far light travels in 1 year. We want to kind of help students put these things in their own words, make it simpler for them to kind of go back and refer. And again, making sense of the information. It takes 228 and 5600 years for 228 and 5600 years for light to get to Earth from Shadar. I don't know exactly how to say the name of that star. So help our students, help them figure out a way to make sense of this information. Again, speed is, they start thinking about the information they're given and how are they going to use it. So we see that speed is given in meters per second, but the table here is in light years. Have them start asking themselves questions about how they're going to solve it. Do they need to change it seconds, see how many seconds are in a year? What do they need to do to help solving this problem? This is a little bit of, these are the steps of marking that text, giving them the tools to look through the information and make sense of the problem. Now, in a graph, we can do the same thing. However, with most of our next gen assessment items, a graph will not be given to them. They will be given information. They have to then create the graph, and then they will answer questions on that graph or chart or diagram, whatever. So again, first step, well, there's no paragraphs. So then I want to circle the key terms, total amount after each month. I look at my labels on my axes. And then I just kind of want to start making sense of the graph. And I don't know that I'm really boxing questions, but I want my students to make sure they understand what's happening. So remember that it's total and not how much each month. So I start looking. Well, at 3, that means that's the amount of money spent in January, February, March. And then this little box down here, this little point here, means the amount spent for the entire year, not just for the month of December. Ways to help our students make sense of the information before they go in and start answering the questions. Now, charting text. The purpose of charting text is to help us make sense of the paragraphs. I think we accomplished this with marking them in the margins like we did in that previous 2 examples with the graph and the problem. So I think in math, our charting is going to look a little bit different. This is kind of those problem-solving strategies where they either draw a picture, make a chart, a diagram, a graph, etc. So, say I have this problem. This is a sample problem from digits, 8th grade digits. I read through the problem. I circle my key important information that I think I'm going to need. And then I'm going to draw a picture. Oh, I box my question. And then I'm going to draw a picture. And note, this picture is not drawn to scale by any means. But after I draw my picture, I go back, I read my question, I realize, you know what? That 14.5 feet above the ground is not important in order to solve this problem. So I'm going to cross it out. And then the student could go and solve the problem and enter their answer into the program. So again, why are we talking about marking and charting text in the math class? Well, we're all teachers of reading now. We're going to have to teach our kids strategies to be successful in the reading aspect of math. We went over the basics of marking text. You have the handout attached to the D2L class. And again, charting for us might look a little bit different than ELA. It might be the drawing the picture, the diagram, etc. With Common Core, our students are going to be faced with problems that are non-routine. We need to be able to give them the tools to answer questions that they do not know how to do. Or they have the conceptual understanding, but it does not look like every other problem that they see. So with that, I just love this quote. It went perfectly with Common Core and with what we're trying to do here. We have to give our students the tools to answer problems that they don't know how to answer right off the bat. So thank you so much for your time. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.